Hello there again. It's time for us to take a look at learning more about FileMaker Pro. My name is Matt Petrowski. I'm bringing you these videos, and I also have other videos over at FileMakerMagazine.com, but in this video for free here on YouTube, we're taking a look at script triggers. That's on screen right now, so stick with me. We'll be on my desktop in just a few. All right, so what do we have for today's lesson? You know, before we even start the lesson, yesterday was so funny. Just a word of advice, anybody who's ever going to do videos live on YouTube, which I'm doing right now, I don't go back, I don't edit these. Yesterday, my mouse froze. It was my little magic mouse. And what happens is if you take a look up here in the screen, right here, what I do is I turn off notifications, and I happen to have that off for a number of hours, days actually, and I didn't get notified that the batteries died, and I didn't have a backup mouse. So this completely stopped. My mouse, I had no control over the computer, completely funny. Now I have a mouse plugged in, so that's not going to happen to me again. All right, so if you're interested in learning about FileMaker, that's why you're here. And if you found this video out of sequence as a result of a YouTube search, if you click on the channel icon here on the channel, you will be taken to my channel where you will have a list of a full suite of series of videos that you can follow if you're interested in learning about FileMaker. Go all the way back to series 1, 2, 3. You will get a very good foundation about FileMaker. Also, for this video, what I do in a lot of my most recent videos, down in the comment section below, you're going to find a link where you can follow along in the file that you are going to have access to. And just before we do that, I need to show you that this video is sponsored by...
This video has been brought to you by FileMakerThemes.com. It's a one-stop shop for choosing a theme to apply to your new or existing FileMaker solution. When considering your next move toward advancing the look and feel of your FileMaker solution, don't forget to visit FileMakerThemes.com.
All right, and we're back. So let's work with the file. As I zoom in here, and I open the file that I'm working with, Time Track, there are some things that I sort of left hanging on the previous video, for obvious reasons. I'm going to go into layout mode on the file here. There was one question that came up with regards to the image that we had added. Now, according to the file that we showed yesterday, what I had done is I had selected the body part right here and then went to the styles and scrolled down. I think I'm going to have to zoom out a little bit more and choose transparent so that the background, when I select and click here, I can use my background image. Now we had this forest that was here, and I showed you that the background can come through all of the individual layout parts. There was a tip that was offered by Chip, which is really helpful. I always forget about using this. When you right-click on the layout itself, pretty much anywhere, you get a contextual menu that gives you access to all of the different areas when you're working in FileMaker. For example, the changing the theme, which we've seen, which we can always click up here, but we can also do that with the right click. We also have the layout setup, which it's really quick and handy rather than going up to the menu to grab it right here. And for today's video, we'll be taking a look at script triggers, but I want to give you one little follow-up tip based on the previous video. And likewise, when it comes to working with the layout parts themselves, yesterday I showed you that you can command or control click and it will flip the part up on its edge, or just basically give you something easier to drag. And also that tip that if I wanted to drag this up through these items, I can hold down the Option key and pass that through. So those are very valuable things to know. We talked about the parts themselves, and it was an overview of how the parts are used. Of course, it's when you're designing things that's when you come into the situation where you need to use the parts. And part of my goal was yesterday to show you that the parts, while a lot of them, when we double click and we take a look at the part definitions, all of these parts, while they're here and we predominantly use most of these, title, header, leading, grand, sub-summary, trailing, footer, and title footer for output, we can use them for the user interface. So we're basically designing for two things, either for the user to interact with or for output. With user interaction, I tend to use fewer parts, but I do use some of the parts in unique ways. And that's what we're going to learn today in the lesson. But just before I do that, there's one final thing I wanted to show in yesterday's video before I got moused out. In this theme file that I have here from FileMakerThemes.com, of course, there is a link in the extras area called Subtle Patterns. Now, I showed you how to put an image into the background or into any body part if you want to. And in fact, optimizing that image, that's something that we'll take a look at later in another video. How do you optimize images? Basically, you want to get them as small as possible without losing so much quality. In today's day and age, you want to make the image at least double the size of what it's going to be rendered at. How do you figure that out? In the layout part, if your layout width is 768, meaning you're designing for a tablet, just double that number, and you need to make sure that your image is at least double that so that when you fit it within the body part and it shrinks down, you get good resolution on Retina displays. And on iPhone 10 and even higher, when we get newer devices, it's actually 3x now, not 2x. So you need to make the image sometimes 3 times if you want it to look good even on the newer devices. But with images, we also have the opportunity to enhance our solution with patterns. Now this website, Subtle Patterns right here, as I scroll this out and I am going to zoom all the way to the bottom. Reason being is I know that if I click on the last of all of the different patterns, I get to the initial ones that were released at this Subtle Patterns website. Now, it was purchased by this company, TopTall, because it had such a following, but originally it was created and it was a GitHub repository, which still does exist out there. So this isn't something that's commercial. It is very much open source. When I click on these thumbnails, what's nice is as I scroll down here, I can find a thumbnail that might be, did it jump not to the last again? There we go, I want the last ones. It jumps to this list of all of these patterns. And of course, you can pick any one of these patterns. This one probably, let's get something that looks completely obvious, like carbon fiber and totally familiar to us. You can see in the background here, it's got this carbon fiber look. If I want to download this, because I'm in a FileMaker web viewer right here, the download doesn't always work. So what I do is I right-click on that and I choose Open Link in New Window. That will open up my web browser and then it will perform the download so that I can go to that download and it's right there. So with this little pattern right here, which is pretty nice, I can see that they've got carbon fiber at 2x and they've got the carbon fiber right here, 24 kilobytes versus 142 bytes. So this is a minuscule file right here, this carbon fiber. Absolutely tiny, tiny, tiny pattern. Nothing I would ever have to worry about in terms of the performance of my FileMaker solution. So I go over to my FileMaker solution. And of course, I'm going to put this in the trailing grand summary so that we can really get the effect of these layout script triggers that we're going to take advantage of here. I am going to add this into this body part. Of course, the default is already selected, so I go to my Appearance tab. I'm going to make my changes by integrating an image. I'm going to select over here and drag that to this particular window, making it easy for me to select. That comes in, and by default, it is tiled, which is what I want. We can see that we get this nice pattern. Now, when it comes to our layout design, we can use a combination of all of these effects. We've got solid colors that we can put in either the background or the body part. We talked about rubber banding yesterday, and that's the background part. We can put an image or we can put a pattern. And this is where you get this full suite of being able to make FileMaker look the way that you want in layout mode. So now that I have this going on, let's take a look at using some script triggers. Now, when it comes to our layout design, I was also expressing yesterday that one of the things that you can do is when we use FileMaker's wizard to create a new layout, and if we choose the form view versus the list view, FileMaker limits it to that particular view, meaning we choose the wizard, we choose a form, FileMaker only makes it a form. Of course, if we just make the new layout, then we've already learned that as I right-click here and choose Layout Setup, thank you for the tip, Chip, we can go right to Views and control what views are exposed for this particular layout. So our goal is to creatively use parts in order to achieve whatever presentation model we're trying to achieve. And if we can do that with the fewest number of layouts possible, then we have fewer things to maintain. I mean, that's ultimately the goal. We can build a monster FileMaker solution that has 500 layouts. And if you want to do that, go for it. Manage 500 layouts. I do not. So I attempt to build as much functionality without being too convoluted or too cluttered in any given FileMaker layout. So that means it boils down to this. I'm going to have to fix this body part, by the way. I just can't deal with the nice, strong trees that we have there. I would have to get a better image and optimize it, which we'll learn to do. So I want to make the most of this layout. And if we take a look at the script triggers that are on the layout right now, with a right click, we can get to the layout setup. Or if you're going to go up to the menu, you're going to find that under layouts, layout setup, same place. You can also, I think there is a way somewhere in up in the, that's it right there. So there's way number 3 right there. Click that little pencil icon. So there's your 3 primary ways of getting to the same dialog box. So script triggers. So whenever we're working in layout mode, we have access to run a script whenever things happen to objects, or in this case, which we're most interested in, to layouts. Now, I'll give you a quick run through of how I've used most all of them, except for on record revert is not super common. And I'll try to convey which ones are more common versus not. The 2 most common is probably on layout enter and on layout exit. Now the on layout enter, we can already see that we have a script called filter view. And if you didn't see that video, we'll take a quick look at that. Go into scripts. It's right here, filter view. What we were doing is, because this is a multi-user database, when we enter into this layout, which we already know as a result of watching this series, if you've gone back to previous videos, we are starting the solution on a blank layout that has no records to load. Then we decide where we want to go, and once we land on the layout, we get the trigger of on layout enter, and we are capturing the account name of the current logged in user, and then we are performing a find. So in other words, we are finding only those records that belong to this particular user in terms of their time records. And we can enhance this so that it filters it based on the last known project that we know that the user had worked on. And these are all of the things that make your FileMaker Solution software. If you expect the user to come in and choose their own last project instead of you as the developer, maybe saving as preferences or anything into their record in the user table, when they come back into software, which is what most users are used to, and return them to all of their previous state, same layout, same record that they were looking at, same everything, you've created comfort, and that's what we're doing as software developers. So when we take a look at some of our other script steps, we start to think about what we have as opportunities. Now, the on record load means that each time that a record loads, that script trigger is going to fire. So if I move from a start time to an end time, or from one record to any other record, then the on record load will fire. Now here's an interesting thing. You're thinking the sound of on record load sounds like, okay, this will trigger when the data of the record loads. No, that's not the case. It's when you go to the record. And the reason that we know this is if you turn on the on record load and you go in, or you hook up a script and you go into find mode, and then you create a new request, you will see that the on record load script trigger for the layout will still fire, even in find mode. So it's any time that we go to a new record, whether we're in find mode or whether we're in browse mode. Key thing to know. The on record commit, FileMaker is a solution that is an automatically committing database. It's transactional, but it doesn't have its transaction model turned on by default. Well beyond the scope of this video for anybody who's new or intermediate. Intermediate, yeah, you're probably fine with that. We'll have to talk about transactions another time, but for the most part, all you have to know is FileMaker commits automatically by default whenever one of multiple things can happen. You click out of a field into any area that is not another field. commits the record. When you switch from one record to another record, commits the record. When a certain script runs and does something that causes the record to be exited, without a commit step, a commit can still happen. So we'll have to talk about transactions later, and that means that on record revert also applies to transactions. So these two sort of go hand in hand, and you may not use them as much with your layout design. On layout keystroke, very cool. Anytime that you're on a layout, if there's a keystroke that's hit, you get to watch for that. Be careful though, if this is a super long script that's tied to the on layout keystroke or the on object keystroke, you will hit issues because FileMaker, it will make things go slower in your solution. For example, you go into a field and that native typing speed that you really get, that's really fast, FileMaker's constantly looking for the on layout script trigger and the on object script trigger. And if you pack those with two full scripts, your solution when users are typing will feel very slow and sluggish. I wish I could fix it, but it is what it is. These are the two most common, on layout enter and on layout exit. So do whatever you want with whatever script when you get into the layout the first time and when you get out of the layout. Now this does not apply to switching the view on the layout, which is what we are going to do. On layout size change, anytime that the layout size changes, that on a mobile device is if you, or an iPhone, if you go from portrait to landscape, that is a change, and that's an opportunity to trigger a script. Likewise, if I click and drag the layout, as soon as I click, drag, and on release, the layout size change will trigger. On mode enter. This is useful when you're designing your user interface, that if you switch from browse mode into find mode or from find mode to browse, two of the most common, and then the less common is going to preview mode in order to preview output. This is a script trigger that you can do whatever you want. On mode exit. This is one when you are exiting that mode. So you've got the same thing like you do with the on layout enter and on layout exit. You have those partners. You have the same thing on the mode when you enter a mode and when you exit a mode. Now here's what we're going to be using, an on layout change. And thankfully, you're watching this video, you're going to learn a very cool tip in this video. On gesture tap really only applies to mobile because that's where you're going to receive taps, and you get a lot of information in that. One thing to note is with layout triggers, some triggers, and with object triggers as well, they partner with certain functions. In fact, if you don't use the companion functions, you will not necessarily you won't get any results. So there is a companion function that goes with this, I think it's gesture, I'd have to start to type it in. The easiest thing is go into, let's take a look at how we would find this actually. We'll go to our data viewer. FileMaker 16 is what I'm using, and of course, anytime you can, when you're working in FileMaker or learning FileMaker, use a copy of FileMaker Advanced. So we start to type in get, and let's see, gesture, there it is right there, get trigger. So here's the tip here. Anytime that you see a trigger name, hopefully the companion function name that goes with that trigger is named with the same words. So when I start to type in gesture, right there, I get the companion function because it was on gesture tap was the name of the script trigger, and the companion function is get trigger gesture info. So that's a helpful tip right there, but really only get results from that when you're working with mobile, so you'll have to test there. All right, and take a look at the last one that we had there in the script triggers. Down at the bottom is on external command received. This also is mobile related, and I'm going to leave it up to you to go research the docs on that. Really only applies with regards to incoming commands that you can get on a mobile device. So very specific, really not something that applies to us in terms of the design and what we're doing here. So in terms of use, I've already given you the biggest use is layout enter exit. Modes might be used, layout size changing, view changing, which is what we're going to use, and then finally all of your record related ones are right here with commits, transactions. Don't really need to pay attention to these if you're a FileMaker learner until you learn about transactions. Record load may be helpful. Where have I used this? The on record load I have used where you can enforce a sort view. So if you are leaving FileMaker's default user environment on, this on-record load means that each time that I load a new record, it's an opportunity to run a script. So if the user has put the database in some state that I don't want it to be in, say for example they've unsorted it, so if I go into browse mode, and I believe if I do Command S, yes, indeed, with a Command or Control S, sort records comes up. And if for some reason the user has used Command S because they thought it was save out of habit of saving a document, which you don't do in FileMaker, then they may have clicked unsort. So if they unsorted the database, what happens is if they move from record to record, as they click on a new record, that script can say, if the database is not sorted, put it back into a sorted order. Now that's a little janky in terms of the UI, but it is something that we can do. All right, so let's get to that ultra cool tip and what I like to do when it comes to using a single layout in order to facilitate multiple views. This is something that I do called off-screen tabs. I've been doing it for quite a while. I'm going to have to decide in this user interface, how is the user going to interact with this? Currently, the default is this list view. And when I was using it, and I created the solution for myself, it was no big deal for me to just look at all of the records. I didn't care if I was commingling start records, which is this is a start record. We can see because it says it's open. Go back and look at the data structure series video if you want to see everything about how this was structured. And then here is my closed record right here. So I've got two different records tracking my timestamp, where we compared this to FileMaker's database, where they were keeping a start time and a stop time in the same record. I wanted to track the timestamps individually because whenever you track atomic pieces of data in FileMaker, it gives you more control over the data. You have the ability to pull more out with regards to statistics and do all kinds of really cool things. But this is not going to be good user interface. So I'm going to have to decide, how am I going to present this to a user such that they really only see either one record or one UI. So what I have is I have the opportunity here to switch between the views. And when we go into layout mode, we can see that what we have is when we go into form view, as we talked about in the previous video, all layout parts display. The top and bottom navigation, they are the only two parts that stay fixed at 100%. You can't resize them no matter what. All other parts, they can zoom or get smaller. And in form view, all layout parts show. In list view, the layout parts only show when they should show. So for example, and here's a really cool little tip. Again, Chip, that was such an awesome tip because there's so many areas of FileMaker that I forget about. This part setup, yesterday I showed you how to add a new part, such as selecting and dragging right here, and then dropping that part and choosing, say for example, a sub-summary when sorted by, we'll choose, it's a random choice right here, ID, and it adds that part in. I now have to go over to my position tab, and remember yesterday, right before the video was freezing on me, I was trying to convey that one thing that will happen is as you're working with your parts, they will become off by a little bit. You'll get this like right there. So this part, because FileMaker has to deal with fractional values now, because it went from pure pixels to points, you end up with these point values, so you have to go in and fix it. A lot of old-time FileMaker developers found that annoying, but it's really no big deal to me. You just come in and type a whole number and change that. But every once in a while, you want to check your parts and make sure that they do not have that fractional value. But that sub-summary part, when I dragged it in from the tool up here up at the top, Chip reminded me yesterday on a YouTube comment about being able to access this part setup right here. The part setup is really pretty cool because it allows me to get to that same dialog that we see by clicking on Create and putting in a value. Now I can select an item right here and I can change it the same way as I double click right here. But for example, this body, if I wanted that same sub-summary there, I can click Create, add the sub-summary, and then put the part in. And then FileMaker is going to give me this option. You get two, or you get, when I say two, you get a total of 2 sub-summaries for any given field. And those can appear one above and one below the body. So when it comes to parts, that's how it works. You can't have, for example, up at the top, if I was going to have a sub-summary based on the duration time, or that wouldn't make sense. But let's say a sub-summary based on the day, or a sub-summary based on the month, which would be really good. A report that shows me how many hours I worked in this month versus that month versus the next month. We'll probably add that in. You can put that above or below. Now, when FileMaker says print above and print below, you can ignore this because this doesn't. FileMaker was an output database way back in the day, but sub-summaries work in our plain normal UI view now in FileMaker. So this print above, print below, really it should be revised and changed. It should be place above or place below. So FileMaker, if anyone is watching that, it isn't just about printing. But if I just chose to put this above, you can see that the sub-summary would be above, like so, or I can drag it and put it below. So we click done, and then I would be able to resize this to whatever I want, but ultimately, here is my goal. I want to present a form view, but I also want to be able to use list view, and I want to do it on this same layout. I want to multi-purpose this layout. Now, the easiest thing in FileMaker is create another layout, but I'm always thinking that's more for me to manage. Can I do it all on this one layout? And you can with the view change trigger. So let's get rid of that sub-summary. And here is something that I do. Tab panels are awesome. They are absolutely wonderful for being able to disclose information as you need. And this is a fabulous trick. I gave it at a couple of DevCons ago. So I will call one of the tabs list, and I will create another one and call that one form. And I'll rename that. All right. The next thing that we're going to do is we are going to switch this to a right alignment, and we're going to say OK. Now, the cool thing about this is tabs, if you're thinking about tabs in the conventional sense, they are just something where you have a bunch of information, you click the other tab, and you show a bunch of other information. But for me, tabs are much more than that. They are a display pane that you get to choose whether that display pane shows or not. So in this theme, I've already included one of the styles, which is called tabs off screen, which you're going to see right there. Now, anything that I do where I'm going to, when I go into layout mode, I want to make sure that I understand that this is something that the user is not supposed to see. I use a very strong color that clashes with the user interface. So when we select this, you can see first off that the whole of the tab pane goes completely transparent. And then I have the text right here, which is in this stark color so that it contrasts. Now watch what happens when I take everything out of the trailing grand summary, which I know that I added the trailing grand summary because that's going to show at the end of the list view. It also, when no records are found because of these objects, as I showed that trick a number of videos ago, it will display options for what the user can do because I don't want to have just a blank area when we're in list view. So if I take this off screen, we're going to resize things around right here. And I move this over to the side, and I'm going to need to get all of these objects out. And you may be asking, why am I dragging all of these things around? Because FileMaker's object containment, we'll have to take a look at that. And here's an easy way that I align objects in order to get them to fit in this area, because I want it to fit specifically from this point down to this point. I want it to fit the absolute dimensions of this part. Use your position tab. Position tab is the best way to go about this. If I select on the sub-summary, and we can see right there, FileMaker did do a fractional value, no problem. I just type in the 240 and fix it up. I can see that the width is 640. I'm not as interested in that. I'm more interested in this height of 240. So I select my tab panel right here, and I will make it 240 as well. So now my part is the same, or my tabs are the same height as my trailing grand summary. Now I select my trailing grand summary, and I simply look at the top value right here. The top value is 342. No problem. I just select right here, and I type in 342. So now I have this tab panel smack right in that place where I want it, and I size things out like this, and I drag this out so that the tabs themselves, being right aligned, are in the non-visible portion off to the side of the screen. Now I just select the auto sizing right here, or the anchoring as we should call it, or the way that I call it, and I anchor this tab panel so that the tab panel will never show these tabs over here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click. I'm going to make sure that the default is list view, and really it doesn't matter what the default should match the view that I'm going to come into this layout on, which is probably going to be list view. I don't know, we'll choose a little bit later. But the whole trick here is I'm going to use the script trigger of the on view change. Yeah, I think that's what it is. And I'm going to switch between these two. So here in list view, I want to put all of my content back right here. And this is what I love about FileMaker. You can get so creative, and let me get these guides off the screen because they are annoying me and I'm not using them when we learned about the grid. Let's go ahead and quickly make these white. I'll just Command 3. If you have not watched any of my other videos, all of these correspond to the keys of 1, 2, 3, and 4. So Command 1, Command 2, Command 3, Command 4 makes it really nice to switch between them as such. You can see they go from blue. And once you get used to knowing what's on those palettes, it makes it really easy. I know I want to go Command 3 to the design, and I want to switch, and I'm going to need to zoom out here with my zoom and select those and change them to white so that they just come up. We still need to design this and make it look good. All right, so now we just need to hook things up. In order to make this work, we're right at about 30 minutes right now, and we will be able to wrap this up probably. Let's right-click. Let's choose our layout setup. We will choose our script triggers of the on view change right here. We do not currently have a script, so we will click the plus. And we'll call this, we can call this typically, I prefix any triggers with the name of the trigger. It makes it easier for me to find the script. On view change time layout. I'll just call it that for right now. So in this script, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use one of FileMaker's functions that says if, and it's going to be get, and I just start to type the same words that correspond to the trigger. The trigger had the word view. I start to type the word view, and I get layout view state. Now, I could look this up, but the way that layout view state works, I believe, is it simply corresponds and matches what FileMaker shows right here, where browse mode is view 0, find mode is 1, layout is 2, or layout may not be 1, preview mode is probably 2. I'd have to look up the functions. I'm guessing right now, and we'll have to rework the logic if it doesn't work. But I basically do this. If layout view state equals 0, if it's browse mode, wait, I have to find out whether I'm dealing with the right function, layout view state. It may be mode state. Let's bring up dash my function, because I'm doing this live. I may not be conveying the right thing. Let's get view state. Let's see if layout view state returns a number representing the current active view state. Yeah, it's the right one. Perfect. I was double guessing myself on whether it was the mode, but mode would be. So I just sort of confused you. I showed you the mode menu of browse, find, layout, preview. That's the mode, the layout mode. The layout view is form, list, table. Very easy to get confused in here. But as I mentioned, my apologies for mixing those two. The view is form, list, table. The mode is browse, etc. So form view is clearly 0 here. So we hide that. And we're saying right here, if the mode is 0, then that means I'm going to put a comment here because it's always nice to know what you're going to do. We're going to ultimately say go to object. What object? We haven't given it a name yet. Then we put an else. Otherwise, we're going to put go to object. Now, this is a super simple script right here. You're basically just determining what is the current state, or the current view of this particular table, and it's going to trigger when we cause a change of the view. So these to-go objects need a name on the layout object. So we'll say OK to that script, and we'll get back into that. But this is where we need to give these tabs object names. That's how it works in FileMaker. You have to give something a name in order to say where you want to go. So naming an object happens within the first area of the inspector. It's in the Position tab, and it is right here called Name. So we name this object, and I name it with a prefix of whatever the object is. It makes it so much easier to understand when you're looking at a whole list of all of these different named objects on your FileMaker layout. So this is tab list, and this one is, when I select it, going to be tab form. So I think you get the idea of where I'm heading here in terms of that script, because all I need to do now is wire up going to those respective objects. So I bring up the scripts, I go to my view change, the new script that I had just created, and in this one, I can always switch these around because I'm just guessing here because I'm doing this live. I'll just put in tab form on this one, select all of that, go in, double click, and just double click and change this one to list. And so this is now wired up, and what you're going to see, and we will show a very clear instance of what's going to happen, and I'll show you the cool part of this. Remember, we added to this part this tiling object, which looks pretty cool when we're in list view. So if we're in list view and we scroll down to the bottom, look at that. We have all the different effects going on. I've got my image, which is in the background underneath as my rubber banding effect. I've done cool things where if I want to put a logo in this image, then what happens is when you rubber band, you get this nice little logo that's underneath. Very cool trick. But I've got this nice tiling of this object, and I'm able to see, you've reached the end of the record set. If I have no records, I get, sorry, no records found, show all. But what happens if I switch to a form view? When I switch to a form view, notice that everything went away. Why? Because that script, that layout trigger is taking that function and saying, if the view changes from form view to list view, I want you to go to this other tab. And it just so happens that the other tab is off screen. Now comes the cool part. When we go look at the tab, FileMaker has this little option right here that tabs share a single style, and that's on by default. If I turn this off, each individual tab can now have a completely different look. I mean, this is ultimate cool FileMaker stuff that I'm giving you here. I mean, these are the ultimate of the ultimate tips in terms of how you can really turn FileMaker into powerful software. So with this selected, and I get my inspector, you know what I'm going to do. I can set this one tab, as opposed to the other tab, to have a different style than the initial tab, and it, of course, can be color of white or whatever I want to have. Now you can see right here what's happening is I'm getting this problem in this particular case with my setup where the strip where the tabs show is not actually, it's not covered. That area, FileMaker is not filling it with a color. So most of the time, I'm not going all the way to the top or all the way to the bottom with this particular technique, and it'll work for me. But in this case, I have to use a workaround in order to solve this. I'm not able to use the fact that I can set this to a separate tab, so I'll go ahead and revert this style for temporarily right now and show you that there is a solution. There typically is a solution to this problem of using just a rectangle. So we get back to this and we change it. We make it solid, turn off my line, and now, of course, I can go, and the cool thing is, even though the panel itself only displays colors down to the area where the tabs are shown, you can still go up into the tab area in order to see this. So we get our inspector back, and the easiest thing is I'm just going to select this, go to Command 1, select 240, select this, put in 240, size it to whatever I want, select the top one, 342 for the top, select this, paste 342 to the top. All I'm doing is using the numbers that are already here in order to get it to be exactly what I want. and I have to make sure, is this contained? It is not contained. Remember, I showed you in a previous video, you know when an object is not contained when you start to drag it, and if it does not disappear, it's not contained within the object you think it is. So I have to drag it out of the panel, now drag it into the panel, and as I drag it, you can see that I get that nice disappearing effect. Now I know it's contained. So now, there's two different ways I can do this. The first way I used the size panel, but I like to do this one as well. I'm just going to simply select this object, hold down the Shift key and click the Tab panel, and then I'm going to use these alignments, and I'm going to align them to the left and to the top. Now, I put it behind my inspector right there, but we can see right there that it aligned that object right up there in the top corner. Now all I have to do is, with both of them selected, I can choose to resize to the largest height right here. And when I do that, it just makes that box the same height as my tabs, and all I'm going to have to do is drag that out. So I'll click off of this, I will select here, drag this out all the way to the edge, and we zoom out, we go into browse mode, and we switch. Let's make sure it switches. We need to anchor that. We go in, we go to our inspector, make sure that we anchor the box as well, and we get our really nice effect. Now the one downside to this, you can see that when I come into I go into layout mode and I come into browse mode, because I have the tab panel set to default to the list view, that's what's happening. So you do have to watch for this when the user comes in and out of layout modes, and I might want to enhance this by using that layout trigger as well, using the on mode enter, so that when I enter into this mode, it's a second opportunity to choose and say, what view are we looking at? Are we looking at the form view or the list view? And if we are, let's go to the corresponding tab. But with regards to the layout switch, you can see what's happening. And as far as the user is concerned, here in browse mode, I have access to the full layout. It just happens to span across multiple parts. And I can design this so that the user uses this as if they would any other layout. Now this is probably intermediate, maybe borderline advanced technique. I don't consider it too advanced because hopefully I've conveyed this in a way that it makes sense. Oh, I can do these things. I can use layout script triggers in order to use parts creatively to do all kinds of cool things. And in this regard, I'm using one single layout with two different views that's going to be able to accommodate most all of the situations. A full form view, and a list view where I can show whether no records are shown or all records are shown. The user can scroll through this, and I have less to manage overall in my solution. So hopefully if you're a FileMaker learner, this wasn't too convoluted or too complex, and my discussion about it has given you more to think about. So 42. I always end up going like that, 10 minutes over. But I don't think you mind too much, hopefully, learning these cool tricks and tips. All right, let's take a look at our questions. I can see over here that I've got a couple of them already that came in while we were going through all of that content. Look at that scroll through right there. All right, so we've got comment about the mouse freezing. Good evening. 8 in the evening in Sweden. Matt, please create. Magnus, you mentioned this yesterday on a comment, and I will have to take a look and go through the comment that you put on the YouTube video looking at all of the different items. I don't know if live I'm going to be able to do this without boring people. So it says, please create a layout with both a regular footer and a title footer. Place a highly visible text in each of them, naming, then by instance, expanding the body. Make the layout part span at least 3 pages. Most of what I'm doing is UI based, but I do know, if you don't know in layout mode, we can take a good look at it. I probably won't be able to solve this exact problem right here live, Magnus, but I will replicate this probably right after I wrap this video up and then take a look and see what's going on. Look at my observation. I haven't hit this situation where I create something 3 pages long, but obviously there's something going on that you are mentioning that I probably need to be aware of. And trust me, I don't know everything about FileMaker. There's always more to learn. But when he's talking about these 3 pages, I do want to give you one tip about that comment, and I will take a look at what he's mentioning offline. On layout mode, there are the ability to view different settings of that layout. This is probably good for another video, but one of them is page margins and page breaks. So when it comes to multiple pages, when he mentions the word pages in that comment, what we're looking at here is if I turn on page margins and page breaks, which these are not helpful when you are designing for your user interface. When you're designing for your user interface, I like to turn those off. In fact, I'll have a video where I show everything that I set for the user interface, and we'll look at some cool settings that you can set in order to preview your user interface in layout mode without having to go into browse mode. But these help for output, is being able to see where your pages are going to break. You've probably taken a look at that. But as I size layout parts out, I'm also going to get another line that if I take this footer and drag this as far as I can, and FileMaker layouts can go extremely far or extremely long. You can have many different pages of output for your output layouts that you design. But you need to be able to, once you design those, you need to be able to get the output that you want. I'm guessing Magnus isn't getting the output that he wants. It always matches whatever your page setup is. So when you set up your page, that's what defines where those boundaries are going to hit. These margin values, the line that goes across, the page setup, where is it? Right there, directly matches with those two values when you're viewing and designing your layout of the page margins, page breaks. That probably makes sense, but wanted to point that out. So Magnus, I'll have to take a look at that and basically see what you're talking about and bring it up in another video. All right, see if we had another question. I've been playing catch up and trying to watch all the videos. Appreciate it. Thank you very much for the thumbs up. At some point, I'm giving away so much of these videos for free. At some point, I may have to switch to doing an ongoing series that I have to get a little money for somewhere. Check out FileMaker Themes. Buy themes. That helps me out. I'm sorry, I must have missed somewhere how you put the picture in the rubber band at the bottom. All right, no problem. We'll rehash that one really quickly here before we wrap up this video. All right, so the background, when we are looking at a layout and we have our appearance right here, this item of background image or background style is the only style that will show when you have nothing selected. As soon as I select any given object or layout part, then I'm dealing with that object. So here I have a edit box selected, and likewise, if I have a part and I select that, which this is going to be, as I zoom out here, let's make sure that the part's getting selected. That's I'm selecting the margin right there. One thing I don't like. Let me turn that off, and let me turn that off, and put my edges, my parts up on the side. So I have a part selected now, and it is the body part. The header is the header part. If I click in this area, or at the very bottom of my layout, which I have a super long footer here, scroll up, So if I click here or here, as long as no object is selected, we get the layout background image, or the layout background, I should say. You can put whatever you want for the layout background, but you're not going to see it in your FileMaker layout if parts themselves have a solid color. You have to set a given part to be none in order to see what's in the background if you've used an image behind. And hopefully that gives you the tip. And you can see that this image is utterly distorted. Why? Because I've sized the part well beyond the dimensions of the image itself, which is what I mentioned at the very beginning of this video. If you are going to put an image into your parts, make sure that the part that you're putting the image into is going to be that the image is at least 2 times, or nowadays 3 times, the size of the part that it's going to accommodate. Or if it's the whole of the background, what's the whole of the height of the layout, or the height or the width that you're designing for. And just make sure that your image is almost exactly 3 times that. Because if you put in a massive image that's like, 5 or 6 times, you're wasting the size of the file to put into FileMaker just to transfer that out to all of the different FileMaker clients. Why transfer a 5 megabyte image file when you only need to put in an image file that's 3 times the size of whatever the maximum height or width of your layout is? So hopefully that helps out. And let's see, this is going to look completely, it's in the form view. We'll have to fix that up in another video. All right, so I think that's going to give us a wrap on this video. Yep, nothing else came in terms of pressing questions. Yes, Jean-Pierre, I need to set up that time with you. And yeah, you know, if anybody's interested, I will start offering some consulting services. I haven't in the past, but I think I'm going to start doing that as a result of the questions that I'm getting from people here on YouTube. But that's neither here nor there right now. What we're going to do is we are going to wrap this video up. So thank you for tuning in. As always, if you'd like to be notified, subscribe here on YouTube. And if you really want to be notified, go to FileMaker Magazine and subscribe there. That helps me out. And the next video in this series will come up right here. And until next time, much luck to you and happy file making.